Welcome to StarSpeak with astrologer Maureen Richmond. Here's where you'll find the latest news on what's up with the heavens. Looking for the inner message from outer space? This is your place. So join me in welcoming your host, astrologer Maureen Richmond.
Welcome, star friends. I'm Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to StarSpeak on the UNX network, your channel for everything paranormal, supernatural, and ufological. StarSpeak airs every Monday night at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, and 5 Pacific. If you're looking for the inner message from outer space, you're in the right place. So sit back now and get ready to enjoy a tour through the zodiac and to the stars beyond. Today's date is Monday, July 17, the year 2023. And do I have a show for you tonight? There's so much to talk about, and we'll do it in 4 segments. First, how astrology works. Tonight we'll be talking about the different layers of influence that are in fact affecting everyone on the planet and particular cases as well. Secondly, we'll talk about what it feels like to experience these energies. Third, we're going to look into the astrology of ufology. And for tonight, I have a special topic for you that you're going to enjoy, a very well-known historic sighting that has quite a story with it. And we'll be looking at both the collective influences that were happening on that day and the personal influences with the experiencer. And fourth, we'll examine long-term astrological influences that bear on the important topics of the evolution of planetary consciousness, the potential for contact with extraterrestrial intelligence and UFOs, the disclosure of historical information about crashes, contact, and retrievals, and finally, the possibility for breakthroughs in consciousness to higher dimensions. So let's get started with the first segment. The inner workings of astrology. Answering your question, how does this work? How do all these things fit together? Well, for tonight, we're going to look at the levels of influence that are happening at any given time. First of all, there are 2 big areas to consider, and that's the collective influences that affect every single person on our planet, and the animal life, and the plant life, and the material matter, and the geological matter, everything, all at one time. Those are the collective influences that we're all experiencing, and there's quite a lot of information there to look at. We can't cover it all in one episode, but we're going to look at some very important factors in that regard tonight. Next, the next level or layer is the individual or personal level. Now, both of these levels contain short-term and long-term influences. In the collective arena, the short-term influences include, for example, the lunar phase, or where the moon is in its monthly phase activity at any given point in time. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. The sign positions of the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and the geometrical relationships of the inner planets of the solar system within the circle of the zodiac. So that's 3 types of short-term influence that bears upon everybody all the time. It's a lot, I know. That's why you need to rely on your friendly astrologer to provide this information for you. The long-term collective influences include the movement of the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto through the signs of the zodiac. And those periods of passage vary in length, with Pluto moving through a sign of the zodiac in about 15 years, Neptune in about 14 years, Uranus in about 7 years, Saturn in about 2.5 years, and Jupiter in 1 year. So you can see that there's quite a span in terms of the length or duration of these cycles, and they all overlap and are interacting at the same time. The way to understand it is to go one by one and break it down to see what's happening. These long-term collective influences, in other words, that affect everybody and all of society, all countries, all nations, all ages, all races, all persuasions, everything. Another type is the planetary pair cycles. And they're also of varying lengths, ranging from almost 500 years in length for the Neptune-Pluto cycle down to the Jupiter-Pluto cycle, which is only 12 years. So as you can see, there are many different types of cycles. And that's in the collective area. In the individual area, there are also short and long-term influences, and they all go back to the individual's birth chart. They all have reference to the individual's birth chart. And that depends, of course, on the month, day, and year that an individual was born. And if we're lucky, we have a birth time for that individual as well, and then we're able to calculate a proper astrological chart, and that adds a great deal additional information which can be tracked. The individual birth signature for the day, month, and year, or the full chart, is relevant and good as an influence or a descriptor of consciousness and therefore of character and action and life experiences throughout an incarnation. Then come along the moving planets in the solar system, and those positions can be compared to the original positions at the time of the individual's birth by arc of separation, or what we call in astrology aspect. An aspect is a measurement of the degrees of separation within the circle of the zodiac between two bodies. That's the method of looking at the changing conditions that an individual encounters over the passage of time in a given incarnation. And those come in short term and long term, just like the collectives do. The short term effects arise from the movements of the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. As they impact the chart, they generate situations that last from a few days down to a few hours. So those are very transient circumstances, still important to the individual, but transient. And then the long-term influences working in the background are generated by the transits of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in comparison to the original stamp of the birth chart. And those can be in effect for as much as 2 or 3 years at a time, generating strong themes or thematic experiences that have a particular lesson or character or relevance for that individual's soul path. So that gives you an idea of some of the layers of astrological influence that we're all working with at any given time. And as you might have gleaned from what I just said, they're all measurements of planetary movement. And in the case of the sun, it's perceived movement of a star because of the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And in the case of the moon, it's a satellite rather than a planet. but it's bodies, celestial bodies in movement. What that means is that in the astrological context, time is a result of movement in the solar system. I know there's a lot of discussion about what the true nature of time is in the metaphysical and ufological communities, and it's a good question to be raising. But I ask you, where do we get our sense of the day, if not from the rotation of the Earth on its own axis? Where do we get our sense of the month, if not the orbit of the moon around the Earth? Where do we get our sense of the year, if not the orbit of the Earth around the sun? So you tell me, is it possible that time is a result of the movement of celestial bodies? That's something to think about. I'll be right back in a moment with more on StarSpeak with Maureen Richmond. Welcome back, Star Friends. This is Maureen Richmond with StarSpeak on the UNX Network. This is your channel for everything paranormal, supernatural, and ufological. Today, we're talking about the multiple layers of astrological energies that affect all people at all times, and also some of those layers that affect individual persons more powerfully at specific times. In this segment, I'm going to continue to talk about the collective influences. That is what we're all experiencing in it together, as a family of humanity, as if we were one organism, responding to the celestial energies. We have quite a few to take a look at. First off, today is July 17, the year 2023. And this is kind of a special day because it's the new moon day. Yeah, that's right. The sun and the moon arrived at the same point in the zodiacal circle today, earlier in the afternoon in Central Time, at the 25th degree of Cancer. So now we're right on the new moon energy. When a new moon occurs, the moon and the sun are perceived from us, or by us earth dwellers, to be on the same side of the earth, together, blended, in fact. And we don't really see the moon at all, and we can't look at it during the daytime. So at night, we don't see any moon at all at new moon. This is an interesting energy because lunar symbolism stands for the feminine polarity in nature. Everything that has to do with femininity in the conventional symbolic astrological sense, being receptivity, magnetic attraction, and the capacity for nurturing, also the night and sleep and dreaming, the things we associate with the moon. On the other side of it, the sun has to do with the daytime, bright light, conscious mind, daily functioning, and the masculine principle. You could truly say that the new moon period is the mating, the coming together, the true conjunctio of the female and male aspects of ourselves. Is when the unconscious mind and the conscious mind have a meeting place, maybe during sleep and dream time or meditation, or maybe just in a thoughtful time. There's a coming together on a particular theme, and it's going to generate 2 weeks of intense activity, interest, and pursuit of objectives that rise out of that new birth of an idea or a sense of what's important. So that's what the lunar cycle is all about, and it's going to bring us up to the full moon on August the 1st, when the sun will be at 9 degrees of Leo and the moon at 9 degrees of Aquarius. So that's going to be a different theme than what we're experiencing today, because the new moon happened at 25 degrees Cancer, which is the sign of memory and the biological drives that underlie the cellular functioning of the human body and of bodies of water. It's a water sign, and the origin of life. And that's where we had our conjunction today. And that's going to work its way into the polarity we'll have at full moon, which is much more about creativity and networking and interacting with one's perceived peer group, that's Aquarius. We'll talk more about that as the full moon comes along. But here we are right now on today, Monday, July 17, and let's get a look at what the week ahead is all about. Today we have the influence of Mercury square Jupiter affecting everyone, with Mercury at 12 degrees of Leo and Jupiter at 12 degrees of Taurus. This indicates that we're in a phase of expanding our thinking, expanding our ideas and our concepts, and reaching for something in the edges of our awareness that we're trying to pursue or understand. It's the opposite of a closed mind. We have an activation that is inclining us towards openness, inclusion, and looking for bigger solutions than we perhaps have ever thought of before. Later this week, there's a very powerful configuration which occurs on Thursday, July the 20th, when Mars, in the sign of Virgo now, at the 6th degree of Virgo, makes a precise opposition to Saturn. And we're already probably feeling that energy right now, because this is a relatively infrequent arrangement, Mars opposite Saturn. It shapes up once every 2 years, and therefore it carries with it a good bit of weight. So 2 days before and 2 days after the exact arrangement probably defines the period of time where we can really feel it. And 3 before and 3 after could be as well. So we may already be there, or shortly there we'll be feeling this energy. What's it about? Mars is individual drive. Saturn is self-discipline. The combination by the opposition is a little difficult. What that means is that Mars is on one side of the Earth and Saturn is on the opposite. So there's a tension there. There's sort of a pull in both directions. And therefore we feel that. Mars in Virgo wants to draw our attention to self-discipline in the area of health, fitness, and wellness. Those are the things that are connected with Virgo. You know, it's a health-oriented sign, and it's an earth sign that connects to the nutrients that the earth gives us in the form of vitamins, minerals, and all those good things that we need from fresh organic foods and mineralized water. So yeah, and exercise. Mars in Virgo is going to attune us to the important details of healthful living. So that's on one side. And on the other, we've got Saturn in Pisces, which is a whole different thing. We're going to talk more about that in the 4th segment tonight when we talk about long-term influences ahead. But for right now, Pisces is a non-detailed oriented energy that's not concerned with the precise ingredients. It's more involved with the general picture and emotional life and psychic sensitivity. Saturn is over there, pulling our attention into that region as well, which is a good region to be pulled to. But to a certain extent, there's a little bit of a back and forth there. I think what it really all comes down to is getting our inspiration from Saturn and Pisces about the important things on the spiritual level, because that's what Pisces is all about in meditation and prayer, or maybe psychic guidance or clairvoyant remote viewing, and applying it in the Mars and Virgo area, with, that is to say, with detail, with exacting attention to the precise ingredients that we need to build into our lives and our self-disciplines. So that's very evident coming up on Thursday, July 20th. Now, shortly after that, really very shortly after that, the next day, in fact, Friday, July 21, we have a really interesting influence. The sun will be on one side of the Earth at 29, viewed through the 29th degree of Cancer in the zodiac, and Pluto will be on the other side of the Earth, way farther out there, but still perceived on the other side of the Earth through the 29th degree of Capricorn. That's an opposition. So we'll have a Sun-Pluto opposition coming this Friday this week. It's a very strong, noticeable, potent, psychic influence on consciousness that sets up a tension or a polarity between the known and obvious public, outer, extroverted side of life, symbolized by the sun on one hand, and Pluto on the other, which is the Roman equivalent of the Greek god Hades, the god of the underworld, the place of darkness, of secrecy, of the unknown, perhaps even the sinister, or maybe even the cathartic, as it was in Greek mythology. So that's on Friday, July 21, pretty powerful. Interestingly, we're going to be talking about an individual's chart in just a moment who has this very configuration in his astrology. That's right. So we got to get a picture of what the Sun-Pluto opposition is all about by looking at his life story. And we'll live that for a day or two around Friday, July 21. Now, I've got a little scientific experiment for you to do, and that is to mark down a period of time to watch and see for yourself whether there is anything notable which occurs. And that will be on Friday, Friday, July 21 at 2 to 3 in the morning, Central Daylight Time. The moon will oppose Saturn and conjunct Mars astrologically. So that's 2 to 3 a.m. Central Daylight Time on Friday, July 21. So that's sleep time for most people in the middle of the United States. Maybe this will affect dreams. Well, for those who are awake, it'll be something different. Check out that period of time and see what you see. Because I can tell you ahead of time, it's astrologically very powerful. What's likely to happen? That depends on a lot of different things, but I want you to watch the time and do your own little scientific experiment. See if you notice anything that kind of intensifies the issues that I have described for this week, such as the tension or polarity between the outer extroverted public daylight consciousness and the secretive, hidden, dark side of the Pluto consciousness. Just wait and see what happens during that time, and do your own experiment. Check out astrological measurements and see if they tell you anything. Yeah, and further this week on Saturday, Venus goes retrograde and will be that way for about 5 weeks. That occurs once every 18 months. It's not an everyday occurrence, and it will tend to emphasize and reiterate the themes and energies that we've had while Venus was in Leo since early June 2023. It will, in fact, reiterate some of those experiences regarding art, creativity, romance, love, the cultivation of self-identity, and self-promotion for those who are involved in making the most of their talents, or perhaps making a career out of their talents. All that will be emphasized very noticeably for 5 weeks from the time Venus goes retrograde on Saturday, July 22 through September 3 this year, 2023. And finally, for this week, the last change that we have to consider is that Mercury will square Uranus, or make a 90-degree arc of separation in the zodiac to Uranus on Sunday, July 23. And that signifies that this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and even into Monday, will be typified by mental acuity, intensive intellectual curiosity, the desire to explore and discover new points of view or connect with information that challenges the official paradigm, and consequently an alteration in viewpoint, or maybe even plans or intentions. I'll be right back for more on the astrology behind ufology in just a moment.
This is Margie Kay, inviting you to check out the latest edition of Onyx News Magazine with thought-provoking articles about UFOs, extraterrestrials, cryptids, consciousness, and amazing photos of anomalous objects and more. And there's always a feature article by our managing editor, Lee Spiegel. Get a free digital issue with your free subscription to the UNX network, or get a printed copy with your X Club Gold subscription in the U.S. Visit unxnetwork.com to see details. That's unxnetwork.com.
Friends, this is Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to StarSpeak. StarSpeak airs every Monday night, 8 Eastern, 7 Central, 6 Mountain, and 5 Pacific. Join us. We'd love to have you join the conversation. Thank you to everybody who's listening out there. Hey, this is a great thing to be talking about. We're going to get into the astrology of ufology. That means what astrological influences were in effect during important sightings. For this week, one important sighting, and what astrological influences were in effect for the experiencer concerned. So tonight's star featuring sighting and encounter is the Travis Walton abduction, which occurred on November 5, 1975. Travis Walton himself was born on February 10, 1953. And I know this because his birth date is posted on the internet and anyone can look it up. It's present on a number of different websites. February 10, 1953. No birth time, however, is given on the internet. So it's not possible to do a full calculation of the chart. But it is possible to look at the planetary positions and the position of the sun and the average position or the approximate position of the moon on the day of his birth. And so that's exactly what I've done. And I can tell you that the sun's position astrologically on the day that Travis Walton was born was 22 degrees of Aquarius. Every sign in the zodiac is constituted of 30 degrees of zodiacal longitude along the ecliptic. And that's just part of the mapping system of the astrological method. Everything that's done in astrology depends heavily on these precise degree positions of the various bodies. And that's what really distinguishes astrology from psychic perception. Psychic perception is wonderful. There's nothing to criticize about it. It's part of human existence, and we need it. We need that kind of revelation. Astrology is actually a more mathematical and, dare I say it, even scientific approach. I know there are a lot of people out there that would probably argue that point with me. But astrology does not posit a gravitational effect to account for the interaction between the symbolism of astrology and the quality of human living. It does not posit a gravitational effect as the medium or mechanism of operation. Instead, it refers directly to the field of consciousness. That's where astrology is operating, in the field of consciousness. Carl Jung called it synchronicity. And he said that those things which arise at the same time are inherently spiritually related. So that's really the idea or the concept that the astrological measurement system is based on and why it's relevant. So that's why relevant to Travis Walton is the 22nd degree of Aquarius for his sun position. On the day that he was born, Pluto stood at 22 degrees of Leo. Hey, Aquarius and Leo are opposite signs in the zodiac, and that means that Travis Walton has the sun opposite Pluto in his natal chart. And that's an influence that's with him for the entirety of his life as a result of having been born with that timestamp, shall we say. It's neither good nor bad. It's an indication of a particular type of spiritual experience that the soul of Travis Walton was interested in. That's what the astrological chart shows for everyone. It shows the type of experience, the themes and issues and objectives that the soul is interested in experiencing. And then the transits that come along and activate it show the periods of time when those particular issues come out or manifested, are directly encountered or walked through in terms of a daily experience. So Travis Walton has this Sun-Pluto opposition, just the same as what I was speaking about a moment ago. You know, this tension or differentiation between the public self, symbolized by the Sun, and the private self, symbolized by Pluto, god of the underworld. The difference between the conscious mind, what is known, what is logical or Apollonian, versus the Pluto realm, which is the area of the subconscious, the realm to which the souls of the departed went in Greek and Roman mythology, primarily in Greek with the Hades ruling the underworld. We use the name Pluto for the same situation. But it was an underworld where the souls of the dead went to process their memories of their just past incarnation and examine the good and the bad and make decisions about the future. It was a place of spiritual catharsis, a place of spiritual self-facing. So this is in Travis Walton's astrological signature, very powerful. There he is. And there you see him in his young years, kind of like he looked at the time of his abduction in 1975. So let's look at what was just actually happening to his chart. Of course, he has positions for the moon and Mercury and all of those areas. But for tonight's segment, we'll just focus on a few of those positions. First off, being his Mars position, meaning where Mars was at the time of his birth. It was 2 degrees of Aries. And also his Jupiter position, which was 13 degrees of Taurus. On November 5, 1975, when he and his fellow crew members working in the national forest were shocked to discover a landed craft, there were some very powerful astrological influences. And for those of you who know the Travis Walton story, you know the rest of the story. You know that Travis Walton, by contrast to the other fellows in the crew, was fearless and walked right up to the craft and ended up apparently being taken within it and going missing on the earth plane for about 5 days and then reappearing. There are people that debunk this story, say it's false, say it's confabulation, say it's his imagination. The problem with that is that there were several other people that saw and witnessed parts of this story. In the ufological community, this story is important. No matter how we look at it, even if we doubt the veracity of the claim that it was a contact with an extraterrestrial intelligence, it's still somebody's experience. It's an experiencer's moment, and quite a moment it was, and it's recounted in several books, and I think a couple of films were made about it. Fire in the Sky is one of them. So astrologically, what was happening for him? Well, interestingly, Mars had just made a retrograde station just a few minutes or hours before the craft was sighted. And the position of Mars at the astrological or zodiacal position of Mars at the time that occurred was 3 degrees of Cancer. So that made it tightly square to the Walton Mars at 2 degrees of Aries. Almost exactly a 90-degree separation, which is a very powerful aspect. Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years. And it doesn't always do so at a 90-degree separation from Travis Walton's own Mars position. So this is a very rare happening. And the odds of it happening at all, against it happening at all, are very high. But it did happen, and it happened on the day that he claims that he was taken into a UFO, and 5 days of time were subsequently lost. So that was one thing. Remember, Mars retrograde only happens once every 2 years, and the actual retrograde station only happens on one day, and it actually happens in a specific minute of time. So it isn't a very frequent occurrence. And it was within a couple of hours, I believe, of the actual event that we're talking about now, that the astrological or zodiacal phenomena occurred. At the same time, the transiting lunar nodes, NODES, the transiting lunar nodes were located at 22 degrees of Scorpio and Taurus, precisely square Travis Walton's Sun-Pluto axis. So that created a great square configuration, true great square with all 4 corners of the square filled in. That does not happen very often by transit or any other method, but it did on that day, precisely on that day. And finally, the sun at 13 degrees of Scorpio was making a precise opposition to Walton's Jupiter at 13 degrees of Taurus. So this was not a random occurrence. You knew that before, but it wasn't. It was very closely associated with precise astrological measurements. Now, more generally and collectively, during the year of this important ufological event, everyone was experiencing a Saturn-Uranus square, and it was exact right at the time of this sighting, with Saturn at 3 degrees of Leo and Uranus at 3 degrees of Scorpio. That arrangement happens once every 45-year Saturn-Uranus cycle. So this was a closing Saturn-Uranus square, meaning in between the opposition and the conjunction. Closing phase of the Saturn-Uranus cycle only happens once every 45 years, and it was in effect during 1975. So, my goodness, there were some very powerful astrological influences behind the Travis Walton abduction. There he is. You see him. He's the sun in Aquarius with the sun opposite Pluto. I'll be right back in just a moment with more on StarSpeak for the UNX network. Hey there, this is Maureen Richmond and StarSpeak. Our final topic for tonight is centered on the long-term astrological influences that bear upon big themes that my star friends all talk to me about, that they're concerned about. Everybody I know all over the world, in the United States, in the UFO community and metaphysics, everybody wants to know, when are we ever going to make a big leap in the evolution of human consciousness? What's the possibility for contact with extraterrestrial intelligence? What about disclosure? Is that going to ever happen? Are the governments of the world ever going to be entirely honest and straight and open with the people of the world and admit the truth that interactions with visitors either from galactic space or other time dimensions or other dimensions altogether have been interacting with Earth for what? Centuries? And certainly since the late 1800s. What's the potential for the open disclosure of that historical information? And finally, what about our personal breakthroughs to higher consciousness? What's the possibility for that? Questions of that nature draw us into a consideration of collective influence. Some of those many layers that I mentioned to you earlier in the program. Questions of this nature inevitably entail an examination of the long-term astrological influences. And for that, we have to look at the movements of the planets farther out in the solar system through the signs of the zodiac. One that I would like to draw your attention to is the passage of the planet Neptune through the sign of Pisces. And what that really means is that Neptune in its orbit is perceived through a segment of the ecliptic that we call Pisces. There's no place out there farther out in the orbit that is Pisces. Now there's a constellation out there that's called Pisces, but a constellation is a bunch of stars that are in varying different lengths or distances, I should say, from our solar system. They're not smack up in one line, although they look like it to us. It looks like it's just a flat dot pattern against a black screen. That's not the case. It's a bunch of stars of varying distance. And certainly there are constellations out there. But the zodiac itself is located in the ecliptic, which is the space around the Earth. It's a mathematical construct, and we see things through it because this is our point of view, what we're looking at on space. Or I should say, from which we're looking out on space. This is where we stand and how we try to get ourselves oriented to what's around us. That's the method standing behind a statement such as Neptune is passing through Pisces. Well, it is and has been since April 2011 and will be through January of 2026. That's a period of about 15 years, a little bit short, but just about 15 years, which is an average period of time for an outer planet to get through a sign. And at this point in time, from today's date, which is July 17, the year 2023, we have about 2.5 more years to experience what this means. Neptune in Pisces. What does it mean? Well, anytime one of the outer planets moves through or appears to us to move through a sign of the zodiac, what it really does is to focalize the themes of that particular sign down to a sharp point. So what we're really looking at is the nature of Pisces. Interestingly, Neptune is the planet that's associated with Pisces in the rulership scheme of the astrological science. For example, Mars is associated with Aries, and Venus with Taurus, and Mercury with Gemini, and the moon with Cancer, and so on around the zodiac. Well, the planet that's associated with Pisces in modern astrology is Neptune. They're one and the same. Pisces, the emblem is the two fish. They're either shown this way or sometimes that way, but it's the two fish. The fishes. Where do the fishes dwell? They dwell in the waters. That's the realm of the god Poseidon, which is in the Roman vocabulary, Neptune. So it's the same deity. Pisces and Neptune refer to, there's a beautiful picture of blue, watery Neptune. Oh, it doesn't have the water like we do, but that's the idea. Pisces itself is a really interesting sign. It's the last sign of the zodiac. Aries is the first, Pisces is the last. And the themes that emanate from the sign of Pisces are those that have to do with the final stages of evolution. The final stages of evolution. The point in time when all the creative process is ready to unfold back upon itself and resolve all the unanswered questions and rectify all the problems and the contradictions and the unknowns, and return to the source of existence. Some call the Godhead, some call the universe, some call supreme intelligence, and so on. There are many beautiful names from many different spiritual traditions that articulate that same idea. Pisces, the function of Pisces, I should say, I'm not talking about individual human being Pisceans, although they probably relate to what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the function of the sign in the zodiac. It's about the final stages of evolutionary experience, when all of creation prepares to return to the state of unity, and all the differences and the polarities and the oppositions and the disagreements and the distinctions begin to dissolve. That's the function of Pisces in the zodiac. It's a water sign, and it rules the process of dissolution or dissolving. That's a very helpful process, even while we're incarnated. You know, water is a great healing agency. It dissolves a lot of things. It washes away the sins of the earth. It purifies the exterior and the internal parts of the body. It creates peace in the aura. If you get in water and in a healing spring or in a swimming pool or a hot bath, it just makes you feel better, especially if you put some Epsom salts in there if you can. Yeah, you know, it's about a healing process. The sign of Pisces is intimately connected with forgiveness and absolution and confession and unburdening the self of all the troubles and the uncertainties and the mental agonies that have been accumulated over time. So Pisces is a profoundly spiritual sign. And now with Neptune there, we've got a lot of emphasis on that and whole process for everybody, the entire planet, all together. We're experiencing this, all of humanity, and have been since April of 2011. The vibration of the outer planets is sometimes more difficult for mass humanity to connect to, but it's still there. It's easier to connect to when you're in a higher dimensional space, since the outer planets connect to that additional reality in that direction. So prayer, meditation, trance states, sleeping, dreaming, remote viewing are states of consciousness that are very closely connected with the functioning of Pisces and the planet Neptune. Not only do we have Neptune in Pisces right now, we have Saturn in Pisces. It's been there since early March of 2023 and will continue through, or to be perceived through, that portion of the zodiac. Hey, I'm behind Pisces now. It goes from early March of 2023 through mid-February of 2026. That's the period of time that Saturn is perceived through the sign of Pisces. And it's about a little bit more than 2.5 years, which is an average period of time for Saturn to go through a sign. Wherever Saturn is, it connotes an area of life that we're called to focus on, to pay attention to, and that we have some responsibilities or obligations or duties in that area. So Saturn in Pisces, we have duties and obligations in the area of attuning ourselves to these higher states of consciousness that basically are somewhat detached from the physical world. You know, in the states of meditation or trance or remote viewing, one quiets the body and abstracts the consciousness basically from the body as much as possible. That happens also in astral traveling and other spiritual states. Out-of-body experiences would be the classic Piscean experience. Yeah, so with both Neptune and Saturn there's a lot of attention for us, or drawn. Hi, there's Saturn for us. Yeah, there's a lot of attention that is being drawn to these areas of experience and of consciousness. In fact, we pretty much can't ignore these areas. Saturn and Pisces, we can't ignore these areas. So what does it mean? what is it, these two transits, what do they connote for these 4 areas that we're concerned with? Is there any potential for the evolution of human consciousness? Sure, yes. And Neptune in Pisces is helping it along by doing what? Softening the hearts of humanity and opening the way for compassion and for understanding and the realization of unity. It's a fantastic influence for that purpose, softening the hearts of humanity. Yes. What about contact with extraterrestrials? Sure, absolutely. With Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, the answer is a big yes. Disclosure. That one's a little more difficult because, Neptune and Pisces are like the fishes, the divine fishes. They're a little slippery, and they kind of like the darks and the depths in the deep part of the pond where you can't see them. So it's a little harder to catch these slippery fish with these influences, but all is not lost because there are other astrological influences that will come in pretty soon, notably Pluto and Aquarius, which I talked about in episodes 1 and 2, if you want to go back to the archives and listen to that. But Neptune and Saturn in Pisces do connote that there are lessons to be learned by humanity about those things which are sequestered or concealed, that in fact concealment does occur. And finally, what about breakthroughs to higher dimensions? Does the presence of Neptune and Saturn in Pisces connote anything for that? Yes, it does. Through the methods that I've mentioned, through intentional practice of consciousness abstraction methods, whatever you like to do, whether it's meditation or prayer or trance or drumming or ecstatic dancing or any of the other techniques that we know in the spiritual and metaphysical communities. Certainly, these influences do incline in that direction. Tonight, we've talked about a lot. We talked about the many layers of astrological influence that are all operating on us at any given time. We've looked at long-term and short-term influences, and we've examined the precise nature of the astrological situation in one very powerful UFO encounter, and that was the Travis Walton abduction in November of 1975. This is Maureen Richmond saying good night for StarSpeak. Please join us again sometime soon on the UnX Network, your channel for everything paranormal, supernatural, and ufological.